I greet you all from Copenhagen. Thanks for joining us today. Before we go to the content of the webinar, I would like to give you some housekeeping information. The webinar is going to be 1 hour, including time for question and answer at the end. You will be muted during this webinar. You can ask questions at any time. You can type your question using the chat box you have, which stands on the top right side of your screen. If possible, please remember to indicate the name of the speaker your question is asked to. In case you cannot stay until the end, the material and the recording of the webinar will be available online at the UNEP DTU webinar platform. You can see the link on the slide. So before we start, I would like to inform you that we comply with the General Data Protection Act, also known as GDPR. This means that your personal data, such as name, email, workplace, etc., is safely processed and stored, and all of your rights in relation to the GDPR are respected. You will have full access to the data being processed about you, and at any time you can request that inaccurate data be deleted or rectified. For access or further information, please contact with Aris and Louise, whose contact details are indicated in this slide. Today's webinar. For today's webinar, I'm pleased to introduce you our speakers. We will have 3 speakers. The first speaker will be Dr. Maria Paz Cigarán. She will give a presentation about introducing the current project that UNEP DTU partnership has in collaboration with Libélula. So she will, the name of the project is Increased Transparency and Documentation of Private Sector Contribution to NDCs. Then after that, myself, Fatemeh Bakhtiari, I will give a presentation about importance of sustainable development assessment and reporting for private sector transparency and its linkage with the enhanced transparency framework. I will also introduce the ICAT Sustainable Development Framework and its application for private sector sustainable development assessment to you. Then we have the third speaker, Dr. Yan Dong. She will give a presentation about overview of other existing tools for private sector to assess their sustainable development benefits resulted from their climate change mitigation actions. So now I would like to ask the first speaker, Dr. Maria Paz, to start her presentation.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Fatemeh, for the invitation to present the project. As Fatemeh said, UNEP DTU partnership and Libélula began a project to increase transparency and documentation of the private sector contribution in Latin America. A little bit than a little bit more than 1 year ago. The idea of this is to actually understand how the private sector in Latin America is doing climate action and how they are reporting it, and if not, how could they do this? No, so we can all help to contribute with the Paris Agreement and with the NDCs, the contributions that the countries need to do for the Paris Agreement. We are implementing this project with the support of the NIDA, and we are also executing this with a newly conformed group of CEOs of Latin American firms that was actually confirmed thanks to this project. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Of course, the challenge that puts us all together is that we know that when we agreed the Paris Agreement in 2015, we were all happy because we had this amazing agreement that would help us confront climate change and get to the 1.50 degrees that we are all aiming to. But we saw that all the NDCs, the contributions that were put on the table, weren't enough. No, the commitments of the countries got us to a trajectory of more than 3 degrees, and that would, of course, mean a catastrophe for the world. So we knew that we needed to do something so countries could present new ambitions, new commitments, new contributions, and new NDCs that were more ambitious in line with this 1.5 degrees, that we needed the countries to begin the long-term strategy and also to implement their systems to monitor and report how were they doing. And there was a challenge that we identified, that how to report and take into account the contributions of non-state actors, of course, including the most important ones that are the private sector. When we saw that, what we saw is that in the meetings in the UNFCCC and around all the climate arena, the private sector of Latin America was not there. Mostly the firms that were attending or were presenting their commitments were from other parts of the world, normally from the north, Europe and other and the US and other companies, but not from our region. So we knew that things were happening, but we didn't know why they weren't visualized. So there were 3 questions that we thought were important to ask ourselves and respond through the project. The first one is, who are the ones that are doing climate action in Latin America, and why is that they're doing climate action? And if they're doing climate action, how are they reporting that, and why? And if not, why aren't they? No, the first thing is to understand what the private firms in Latin America had to do with climate action and their reporting. The second question that we wanted to answer was how were they doing climate action? What was the route that they were taking, and why? So this could inspire other private firms to follow the same path, or at least know how to begin doing climate action and reporting it. And the third question that is the most important one is that we know that we're not enough companies doing this. So how could we catalyze more climate action and report it in line with the NDCs and the systems of monitoring and reporting and verifications that countries are putting in place to show how they're doing with complying with the Paris Agreement. So these are the 3 things that we are working on in the project, and the partnership is very interesting because UNEP DTU, of course, is very knowledgeable and experienced in methods and being very rigorous with data. And in our case, Libélula, we work a lot with the governments in facilitating the implementation of the Paris Agreement, but also in advising companies in their path towards sustainability in a context of climate change. So this mixture of things, I think, makes us a very good team to answer these questions and to propose something that is worthy for the world. So how do we do that? The first thing is to strategize, right? And to strategize, you need to involve those that are the protagonists of the It's very interesting because it's confirmed by 19 organizations that are very different. No, it is trying to represent like the whole ecosystem of the private organizations in Latin America. So we have global enterprises that, I don't know, have revenues of $30 billion from a little startup that is just beginning to apply circular economy as a service for others. So what we have is a very good representation of how the Latin American private firms ecosystem works, and of all of them are champions. All of them are already taking climate actions and are very knowledgeable and very committed to it. We have organizations from 8 countries, and 32% of them are those new types of companies that are purpose-driven companies that are called B Corps. We have, the other thing is that we have all ages, all women, men, and companies from all sectors. We have the CEOs and also some of part of their team working with us. So it's a really interesting group, and of course, who else to strategize with them? And with them, we are strategizing and also doing some events for CEOs in Latin America that, of course, you are invited to join. The other thing that we do is, of course, research and then the communication of that research. And we are having at least four reports that we're going to deliver, and that are very interesting. And one of them, the first one that we are finalizing, is about the motivations that the private sector have to do climate action and report. And we have done that with 15 high executives in Latin America. And what we have found out is that the reporting is not necessarily an incentive for them, unless they are a big corporation that needs to take care of the reputation and they have some requirements for financing, etc., or if they have a certification. What they do have a motivation on is to do climate action. So our challenge in the project is how to make these reporting systems attractive to the private sector, and really tackle the incentives for them so they can show the contribution to the world, how the Latin American companies are contributing to the world, and incentives being less costly, visible for others, and attractive for them to report is something that they propose that we could do. The other thing that we are doing is to understand not only the why they're doing climate action, but also the hows, how they're doing climate action. And what we have found is that they are very, very progressive in their thinking and their action, that they are transforming their whole company to be zero emission, zero waste, and resilient. And some of them have begun a long time ago, and some of them are just beginning, but they are changing like all the different lines of businesses, from products and services, and the way they establish KPIs, from the way they establish their partners for the value chains, or they report and establish some governance. So this is gonna end up in a report that is called Transformative Action Reports that UNEP DTU is gonna be developing. The other thing that we are also doing with UNEP DTU is to understand what are the different methods and how are the different enterprises reporting in Latin America. And we have analyzed 86 enterprises and found different things. Right now, we are processing the results, but this is just for you to see the countries that we are covering in this study. What is that what we are going to do with all these studies? After putting this accessible to you all, is to develop some protocols and modalities for reporting climate action in Latin America, in line, we hope, with governmental systems, having different cases being advertised or diffused in an outreach strategy for you to know how companies are doing climate action and why they're doing it, and what are the benefits, and also how to establish a virtual platform to register this climate action and making this visible. So these are the things to come. And with that, I just want to finalize with two invitations. The first one is to join us in this event for Latin American private sector that we are organizing with UNEP DTU, that is called Nexus +1, that is going to be in November 17, 18, and 19. There you're going to be deepening your understanding of cases on how to do climate action and why and what's the route just presented by the protagonists, by the CEOs and the people that are working on this, but also how to deepen your knowledge on how to report and how to better report and make visible your action. The second invitation is those of you that are doing already climate action and wants to be part of this strategic group of CEOs of Latin America, please just send me a message to this email, and we would love to take into account to be part of this movement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria Paz. So I would like to start my presentation talking about the objective of my presentation. So the presentation will introduce private sector representatives, which I'm sure many of you are the ones, with the steps required for measuring, reporting of sustainable development benefits of your mitigation action that you do in a common and agreed format. And it's very important because it will give the private sector enhanced credibility for both the national and international point of view, including in the contents of UNFCCC negotiation. Also, the presentation will touch upon the application of ICAT Sustainable Development Methodology, which helps users, such as private sector, to systematically assess multiple impact of their mitigation actions. So let me just give you a bit of background what is the linkage of this assessment of sustainable development and being transparent with nationally determined contribution, and why countries doing nationally determined contribution. So you all have heard about the Paris Agreement, and after Paris Agreement, the countries, they committed to come with a document called Nationally Determined Contribution, which in that document they are talking about their mitigation targets for the next 5 years, and every 5 years they have to submit that. And from 2024, the Paris Agreement rules will come to the full implementation. So countries need to prepare themselves to be able to report on what they do in terms of the mitigation of greenhouse gases and also contribution to sustainable development goals. So achieving the long-term temperature goal of the Paris Agreement requires that countries undergo a transformation toward low-emission climate resilience development across all sectors, both at the public and private sector. So while the NDCs submitted to date represent that improvement at the global emission pathways relative to a business as usual scenarios that they define, the collective ambition they reflect is still far from the Paris Agreement long-term global of limiting warming to 1 degree and 2 degrees. I just want to show you in a figure just to give you an understanding what I mean by that there is a gap. So I just want you to, I don't want to confuse you with the number. Just please, as an example, look at this in the Paris Agreement. One of the goals is to have it to reach to 1 degree range. And by 2030, we expect, if we are committing to Paris Agreement goal and reach the Paris Agreement goal, we expect to be in that area that the arrow showing you. And then, based on what NDCs are suggesting, that if countries are successful to commit to the NDC and do the implementation of their NDC scenarios, we will be at these two areas of red and orange dots that you see in 2030. So it means that there is still big gaps of 32 gigaton or 29 gigaton to reach that the area of 1 degree. So we can conclude two things from this. One thing is that either the NDCs are not ambitious enough, so they have to be more ambitious. And then also it can show that private sector and other non-state actions are not well reflected in national and international effort. They are not enough data available to count what they are doing and what is the contribution to mitigation, reduction, and sustainable development. So as I said, even though the enhanced transparency framework will enter into full implementation phase by 2024, still many developing countries lack the tools and institutional and human capacities to comprehensively assess the impact of national policies and actions that they are doing. So transparency effort needs to be developed to ensure that the private sector and other non-state actor actions are appropriately measured, reported, and verified. And that's one of the aim of this project that we are doing right now, and Libélula is collaborating with us. So why even transparency and reporting on sustainable development matters? So I told you one reason in the previous slide, and the other reason that we can come up with is lesson learned from sustainable development assessment in the context of compliance and voluntary carbon market show that a lack of transparency on sustainable development contributions and safeguard principle of project activities can be harmful. For example, negative impact have to be addressed. So that's the very important point, that when you report, assess the sustainable development impact of your actions, so you get to know what are the positive and negative impacts, and then you will have a plan how to address this negative impact. So therefore, documenting how the private sector and other non-state actors have contributed to sustainable development goals and targets will be instrumental in advancing the engagement in the necessary enhanced ambition required, for example, to meet the Paris Agreement goals and the 2030 agenda. So having said that, then we come to a conclusion that alignment of the national determined contribution, the NDC implementation, and private sector actions with sustainable development goals is crucial in order to achieve and sustaining the level of economic, social transformation required by the goals of the Paris Agreement. So, as I said, so the alignment is important. So, as a CEO of a company or a decision maker, so you will have different actions in front of you to take. So you want to know which action you take. So the alignment with the sustainable development goal is very important. So you for sure have that in the list of your goal. And then reducing of GIG emissions is also important because you're doing things related to climate change. So you also keep that in the list of your goals. And then you have for sure other goals, for example, developing of economics and adapting to climate change. So you have set of goals. And then you need to, in order to prioritize your actions, you need to map the actions based on against each of these goals, then come up with the action or choose the action that has the most or provide the most synergies with the goals. So in this figure, the darker the area, the more synergy between the goals. So that's one way you can use different tools in that area to come up with the best action that provides you with the more goals that you want to have. So it comes a question that how to communicate sustainable development impacts, and do we have any existing tools? I'm sure all of you know and have been using some existing tools for now. There are some tools available in the market. Some of them are for free, publicly available. Some of them are not for free, so you have to buy those tools or pay some fees for that. So I'm just giving you a very brief of the four famous tools that are available for users for assessing the sustainable development, and then I will focus on ICAT Sustainable Development Frameworks. My colleague, Dr. Yang Dong, in the next presentation will introduce you with more tools, because part of the project that we do, we are making a comprehensive list of available tools and do a literature review and assessing those available existing tools in order to show the result to the CEOs to choose from. So So the gold standard for the global goals is a tool that the approach that they are using the voluntary standard, and the owner is gold standard, and the scope is to assess the sustainable development for activities and programs. ICAT has been developed by a consortium of ICAT, UNEP, it includes UNOPS, WRI, and UNEP DTU, and the approach that is using is a technical guide, basically. The same goes to UNDP. CLIP tool is mainly a calculation and visualization tool, and developed by UNDP and looking at activities and policies and actions. Another tool is CDM SC tool, which I'm sure all of you remember the CDM time. So this tool has developed in order to assess the CDM activities, and the voluntary tool specifically focused on the CDM project. Let us just focus on ICAT Sustainable Development Methodology, and the reason is that in this during this project that we have, so we are going to adopt the Sustainable Development Methodology from ICAT that we have developed in-house, collaborate with, as I said, with WRI and UNEP partnership together. So we want to use this tool, and we would like to adjust it to the needs of you as a private sector representative. So we will be happy if you can share your feedbacks when you read this tool. At the end of the webinar, I'll share with you the tool and templates. And during this project, we are working with representative of private sector, the interview with CEOs, to get to know what are the gaps, what are the needs, and then at the end of the project, we are adjusting this tool and ready to use with companies to assess their sustainable development. Purpose of these methodologies is, the good thing about this tool is basically help users in order to assess sustainable development impacts of actions in an integrated way across 3 dimensions of environment, social, and economic impacts. So help decision makers to develop the effective strategies by knowing a better understanding of sustainable development impact of the project that they are going to use. So it gives the possibility to do ex ante and ex post analysis, and then support consistent and transparent reporting of sustainable development impact. So also gives a template how to report. So this is an overview of this methodology. There are 6 chapters. As a user, you can follow it chapter by chapter and learn about the process, or you can, based on your need and objective of what you are going to do, you can directly go to each chapter and get benefit of the data and information in each chapter. So, as I said, it's a flexible tool. If you have a general objective or a specific objective, you can use this tool based on how you want to report and who you want to report to. So when we talk about assessment of the impact of sustainable development, so we talk about the impact. So the way to, in order to calculate or assess that impact has been described very thoroughly and comprehensively in this framework in the chapters 8 and 9 and 10 by saying that so the first step is defining the baseline scenario that you need to do, and then you come up with a policy scenario, and then you subtract the policy scenario value from the policy scenario. Don't worry, next slide I'm going to visualize what I say. And the reason for that you need to come up with a baseline scenario is it is difficult to assess the impact without having the baseline scenario, because different things, factor can result of occurring that impact. So you need to have 2 reference points in order to assess that impact. So here is as you see, the baseline scenario, which refer to the condition that the event or a condition most likely to occur in the absence of that action that you do. And then policy scenario or action scenario, I call it here, represents the event or condition most likely to occur in the presence of that policy or action being assessed. And then you subtract and you get the impact of the policy and action. Also, you can use this framework in order to track progress of indicators over time, because sometimes you want to know or to understand if the policy or action that you're doing is on track. So you need to basically know or calculate that indicator value over time. So you get the guideline how to do that monitoring trend using this framework. Also, when you do the sustainable development assessment, you do it for different reasons, to report to different people and with different objectives. Sometimes, and then each time, you don't need the same level of accuracy. So based on the level of accuracy that you need, you can define which methodological options you have. So maybe sometimes you don't have enough resource available, so you have fewer resource available, so you go with a less robust result. And when you go with a less robust result, number of impact category that you use, or should you use qualitative or quantitative impact assessment, or what kind of data you need, or the method that you use is different. And as opposed to when you really want to have a more robust result and use more resource required. So this table gives you an overview of what kind of things, options that you have when you change the accuracy. So you can read the first 3 chapters about that. You get the guideline, what you need to know. And then the framework gives you a very comprehensive planning of the assessment. You have to start with the data collection. What are the important points that you need with the data collection? Stakeholder participation is a very key and important step that you get the guidance about that. We also developed under ICAT project. So on ICAT, if you go to ICAT website, so I have shared the link at the end. So you get also a specific guideline for a stakeholder participation, how to choose the stakeholder that your pool of data be very representative, how to minimize the bias when you are interviewing, and all these techniques. And then if you need a technical review for your report, also gives you direction that how to set up a technical review. So, and also this framework gives you an overview with different approaches that you can use, or a mix of these approaches when you're doing the assessment. The good thing about this framework is using some other existing frameworks, you don't get that detail of information about such approaches and what are the factors of each approach. You need to know when you use them and when you want to report them. But we tried to be very comprehensive. For example, if you do qualitative impact assessment, so how to report it afterward? What are the things you need to know about classification of likelihood, magnitude, or the degree of the change, nature of the change, is it positive or negative? So all this you have to know about it and you have to report about it. So qualitative impact assessment, quantitative, and tracking progress of indicator over time. So the chapters are listed below. So chapter 1, 2, 3, you can read more. So in this table, we have tried to illustrate what are the pros and cons of using qualitative assessment or quantitative assessment, because that's a very common question that comes from users, that which method is best for me, or which method is superior on the other one. There is no answer, one answer fits all. So you get the answer based on basically reading about pros and cons and think about your objective. So I talked about impact, and this framework helps you to characterize each specific impact using 5 steps. So assessment of likelihood of the impact is the first step, and you can basically one of the key component or one of the key tools that you have to do is you have to use is the stakeholder consultation to basically know or rank that impact that you have. Is it very likely to happen, or likely, or possibly, or unlikely, or very unlikely? These are the grades that you can give to the impact that you have in your mind from the action that you do. The second step is to know about the degree of change, or we call it here magnitude. And you need to think about, okay, so for this action, I need to think about extent of the area affected. Is it a single site, local, regional, national, or international impact? During the change, is it a short-term, medium-term, or a long-term change, or the size of the group affected? So by knowing that, you can basically grade that magnitude of the impact as a measure, moderate, or minor, when it's a substantial in size, or moderate in size, or insignificant in size. So why you need to know about the likelihood and magnitude? Because in step 3, you basically determine the significance of impact. So as a rule of thumb, users should always think about the impact as significant unless it's basically minor in size and unlikely or very likely in likelihood. So the 4th and 5th step are basically focusing on determining the nature of the change. The impact are either positive or neutral or negative. And then step 5 focus on the reporting of the result and provides the reporting templates. And then also you get some guidance on defining the assessment if needed. So chapter 6 and 7 are very much touching those points. And then at the end, it gives some recommendations that when you want to report on your assessment, what are the points that you need to basically report on in order to have a very comprehensive report. So you can read more about that. For example, you need to talk about the objective of the action that you use, or the impact categories that or indicator to assess. What was the indicator that you use? For example, when you talk about the environmental dimension, so air quality is the impact category that you have, and then for air quality, what indicator you use. And then qualitative, if you use the qualitative assessment impact, what are the points that you need to know? And then when you use the qualitative approach, the same quantitative baseline scenario you need to know, and all the things related to the assumptions and justification of your choice. The same goes with, as I said, if you have the ability to do the ex post analysis or ex ante analysis as a policymaker, if you want to know this action that you take, what is the impact in the future, or the action, what was the things, that condition that happened, how much was from these actions in the past. And then also, if you use the quantitative assessment, it's very important to know about the uncertainty. You need to know how to report on the uncertainty, and then at the end, monitoring performance over time. Monitoring performance over time, it's important because at the end of a story, so what you do is that what we want to know as a private sector, you need to report on what you do on sustainable development or greenhouse gas over time. And this is because every 5 years, countries need to submit their NDC and what they do and what they have done. So you need to regularly collect data and report. So that's why you need to know about the monitoring performance over time. So for, that is basically the final word or final slide that I have. It's about the role of private sector in tracking sustainable development goals. You maybe ask about yourself that, okay, the countries or national government, they need to report on that. What is my role as a private sector and why I have to be involved or know about all this assessment? So it's very important tracking overall progress towards sustainable development should be aligned with existing and emerging national framework targets and indicators. That is true. And then also countries, they need to establish a MRV system for data collection to individual policies and actions. That's also true. But and countries, they have access to some top-down national statistics and indicators which are useful to monitor overall country progress towards sustainable development. However, that's the important point that we need to know, and I'm sure you all know, that progress toward achieving sustainable development is made by implementing policies and actions on the ground. And that's where your role and your participation comes into the attention, and therefore the role of private sector is important in providing relevant data, because you're the one working on the ground, you're the one have access to the data, and you're the one needs to know about how to collect the data, how to analyze data, and how to report the data. So it's a top-down process. It's not a bottom. It's a bottom-up process. It's not a top-down process. So it has to start from your side, and then while you make the report, you need to know how to report it to the national governments or national authorities, and then they can contribute the data coming from the private sector into what they want to report internationally. So that's why the aim and the whole point of this project is to aware you as a private sector representative that what is the transparency and why we need to do the assessment of sustainable development goals. So thank you for your attention. In this slide, I have shared with you a link of templates and sustainable development assessment and also a short webinar about an instruction of how to use the sustainable development assessment methodology. And as I said, we will be very happy to know your feedback and your opinion about this guide and your suggestion and proposal how we can improve this guide in order to fulfill your needs and your expectation of for sustainable development assessment. So I'm going to end my presentation here, and I will ask Dr. Yang Dong to start her presentation.
So hello everyone, so I'm Yan Dong. So here now in my presentation, I'm going to give you an overview of other existing tools for private sectors to assess their sustainable development benefits resulted from their climate change mitigation actions. Well, here's the outline of my presentation. So first, we're going to discuss I'm going to tell you about why we want to do this SDG protocol reviews, and then I'm going to introduce you with the approaches that I use to do the reviews. And afterwards, then I'm going to tell you about the result of our review and also discuss the pros and cons of the protocols. So let's start with the objective of the SD review, why we want to do it. So in general, the aim of the whole project is about develop a monitoring, reporting, and verification guidance for assessing sustainable development impacts arising from the climate actions in private sectors. And we know that already that there's a lot of guidance protocols out there to assessing sustainable development impacts arising from different actions. And that is like a mountain of existing tools, protocols available there. So that's where we're going to start with. So first of all, we would like to review those mountains of already existing protocols that we can use to assess our SD impacts arising from the actions. And then from there, hopefully we could dig out some diamond which represent that there's some protocols which is already somehow suitable for our purposes, and it gave a good practice on how to assess SD impacts coming from activities. And so we could look at the pros and cons and draw some recommendations. And at the end, hopefully we can use the diamond that we dig out from the existing protocols as inspiration and also as construction materials for building our new MRV guidance. So that is the whole project about, but this presentation will not give you the whole project. This presentation will focusing on looking at the current protocols. So what is existing there? How do they behave? And so following are the steps I took to do the review. First of all, I have to identify what are the existing protocols out there which could we use for assessing SD impacts arising from climate actions in private sectors. And so hopefully from this identification, I will come up with a long list of potential suitable protocols that could serve my purpose. And then afterwards, I have to develop a screening criteria which describes what is the ideal protocols I have in mind. And using these screening criteria on my very long listed potential suitable protocols, then I could end up with a shortlisted, selected suitable protocols that could help me to assess SD impacts. And again, here now I come up with a handful of protocols that I think they are really good for my purpose. But what are the pros and cons? I would like to know that. So here I further develop some criteria for assessment on those shortlisted protocols. And these will tell me what are the pros and cons. And then I can come up with recommendations. So those are the 5 steps I'm going to follow to review the existing protocols. And so for the first step, where I try to identify the existing protocols, I use the 3 different approaches. First of all, I actually go through hundreds of scientific publications where they discuss and summarize what are the protocols available. Second, and I'm go through the known institutions' websites, such as the UN body or the gold standard, that to find the protocols that they developed. And third, I also ask experts like Maria, Fatemeh, and the CEOs in the companies or sustainability managers in the companies, and asking what are the protocols you use in order to complement my previous 2 search methods. So using all of the methodologies here, I can come up with a very long list of protocols. Now I have to screen them. So those are the criteria I use for my screening process. This includes, the first one is the year of the most recent update. It tells me how recent is the protocol. And next, I would like to know is the protocol offers a step-by-step guidance so that an average person in an average company could use the protocols to assess SD impacts of the activities. And third criteria I would like to have is that I would like to know if the protocol is specifically designed to be used by companies or on assessing projects' impacts. Because if the protocol is originally designed for other purposes, then we might need some adaptation in order to use it within the private sector context to assess impacts coming from the climate actions there. And next question then, of course, following that one is that after adaptation, is it the protocol really useful or applicable to be used in a company context? And the 5th screening criteria that I use is that, of course, language. Since it's going to be used in the Latin American, so the protocols has to be written either in English, Spanish, or Portuguese. So the company's private sectors in the Latin American can understand it. The last, not the least criteria is that we hope the protocol can cover 3 pillars of the sustainable development. That means it should provide some guidance on assessing environmental impacts, social impacts, and also economic impacts. So using these 6 different screening mechanisms, then we actually can downgrade my very long list of protocols into a much shorter protocols list. And so for those short list of protocols, we have to do another assessment in order to identify its pros and cons. And here I just list some of the examples of the criteria. So for example, if it's really well known by the community, is it specifically targeting at the sector, or it's general, it can be used in any sectors? Or that the protocol draws on other protocols, so using, for example, the GRI as inspiration, or using ISO standards as inspiration. And also, we also look into a lot of technical details in the protocols. For example, do they include any verification or validation processes? And do they provide guidance on uncertainty assessment? So all of those details that we use to assess the short list of protocols in order to identify their pros and cons. So here comes some of the results that we have reached so far. So from all of my literature research, I come up with 36 protocols in the long listed. And again, I have to say that by no means this is inclusive. There is a lot of other protocols out there as well, but we think these 36 might be already representative for all of them. And again, this is subject to update as the project is going on. And so the examples of the 36 protocols include, for example, Gold Standard, the UNDP CLIP Tour, the ICAT, as Fatemeh mentioned before, the GRI business reporting on the SDGs, and also the SDG Compass, or the SASB standards, the SAM Corporation Sustainability Assessment, and the SDGs official indicators. And there's, this is just the examples. We also have a much more protocols that was identified in the first screening phase. And if we look at those 36 protocols, we can say that now you see the updated year of those protocols. We can say that actually the majority of them are developed during 2018 and 2020. And even the oldest one is developed after 2010. So that means there is continuous effort to try to develop the protocols, and the protocols we're looking, they are pretty fresh and they are representing the current status. And if we look at what is originally the protocols are designed for, then we can say that the majority of the protocols are actually designed for assessing the sustainable impacts of the companies. And well, that actually suits our purpose quite well, because if you do some climate actions in the companies, it will change your sustainable performance of your companies. So those protocols looks like good practice for our purpose. We can also say that there's around 5 protocols that is targeting at assessing the performance of the project. Those could also be used as good practices. And so the last very important criteria when we screen in the first step is try to say what kind of guidance the protocols provide for the users to assess the SD impacts. So we can say that 3 of the protocols, they actually provide step-by-step guidance. That meaning that it gives you guidance on how to identify your climate activity, how to link it with impacts, and how to assess impacts, and also how to interpret your impacts. So those protocols are really good practices which can be used by an average person with an average knowledge in an average company to carry out the study. And we also say that there's 2 proposals which only focusing on basically the impact assessment, but it doesn't give you indications on how to identify your activities or how to link your impacts with your activities. So those ones are not so good for use. But we also have 6 protocols which also provide quite detailed step-by-step guidance that tells you how to identify activity, how to identify your impacts. But in the protocol itself, it does not provide any assessment methodology, but it refers you to other protocols such as GRI or the ISO standards for assessment. Those ones can also serve as a good candidate for our purpose of protocols. And then we also have a bunch of other protocols which basically presenting no assessment methodology at all, or just present yes/no questions on the website without really explaining why you have to answer those questions and what is the result of those questions. And we also have 12 protocols which just presenting what is the principles or criteria of a good practices. So those ones will not be considered in the shortlisted protocols as they are not suit our purposes. So using those ones, we end up with the shortlisted protocols. And here are the pros and cons that we assess those shortlisted protocols. First of all, look at the pros. We can say that actually sustainable development is already very well recognized in the private sectors, judging by the clicking on the sustainable development protocols used by the companies. So it's quite a lot of people are searching for them. So we assume that they are already known by the companies, so it's not going to be very difficult for them to find the relevant person to apply it in the private sector. And second cons that we find is that the existing protocols, especially the shortlisted ones, they actually have similar steps for assessing the SD impacts. It includes identification of the activity, identification of the impacts, which is related to your activity, and also assessing impacts. So there is already a harmonization in how do we assess impacts arising from the activities. And third one, although the steps are there, and we would also like to know that if the assessment methodology is already, fortunately, we also find that the impact assessment, both identification and assessment methodology, are already available, and there is a variety of them to choose from. So that gives us a good foundation to perform our SD impacts using the existing protocols. But we also have the cons on the existing protocols. For example, we find out that the coverage of the impacts are often limited in the protocols. And it's not because they don't want to cover every impact which is relevant, but it's due to the capability of what is relevant for the activities. And it also might be due to the availability of impact assessment methodologies. So there's some works we do to expand the coverage of impacts that could be arising from the climate actions. And the second account, we find that although a lot of impact assessment methodology out there available, but they are often not really well summarized and presented in the protocols. So it means that you actually require some expertise from the users to find out what impact assessment approaches to use, and that's pretty difficult. And well, we all know that if we have some examples for how the other people use the protocol, it will be really nice for us to understand it. And unfortunately, the examples are not always available and sometimes are lacking. And the fourth comes we find out is that, well, the technical details such as how to define your baseline and how to do your uncertainty analysis, how to define your scenarios. So those technical details, although very important, they are not well often described in the protocols. The fifth comes we find out is that the review, monitoring, and the verification plan is not always available in the existing protocols. So that means we have to make some efforts to make the plan mandatory in the protocol. And the last, not least, counts that, well, with training programs and also contact point in the countries, it will be much easier for the users to understand how to use the protocols. As webinars now are more available nowadays, but not all of the existing protocols providing such training programs. So that's also something to work on. So using those cons and pros, we have a good idea of what are the existing protocols that we can draw some recommendations on. And we also know what we should work on the cons to make our guidance better for use purpose. Okay, so thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jan. So now we are going to start question and answer session that we have. Sorry for this box. So before that, I just remind you that the recording of the webinar and slides will be available in UNFCCC partnership website in that link, both in Spanish and in English. There are some questions that I had time to put as a slide, and we are going to talk about it. So anytime that the question referred to a specific person, like via past or young, I will ask them to come in and provide their answer. So the first question that we received is, what are the tools for collecting data during this for the sustainable development assessment? So we have both in the ICAT framework and in general, we do have different tools available for assessing of the sustainable development impact. And the tools, like, for example, if you are doing the qualitative, also quantitative, can be a survey analysis, interviews, focus group, participatory method, document and other source available, case study approach, and some very quantitative analysis like valuation, cost-benefit analysis that you can use. So there are different methods that we have made list available also in the ICAT Sustainable Development Framework that you can learn about those tools for the assessment. So we also received a question that have been asked that during the presentation you talked about dimensions and impact categories for assessment. Please give examples. So what I mean by dimensions, first of all, dimensions refer to 3 dimensions of or 3 pillars of sustainable development that we have: environment, social, and economics. And as I said, ICAT framework gives you direction that you basically you have ability to assess choose impact category under each dimension and then assess them. So the impact categories, a type of sustainable development impact affected by a policy or action. That's the definition. And for example, examples are impact category, or when you talk about the social pillar or dimension, job can be an example. When you talk about environmental dimension, air quality can be an example. When you talk about economy, economy, for example, energy access can be an example of that, and so on and so forth. For example, social can also, gender equality can be an example of impact category. And then also when you do the assessment, so you start from the dimension, impact category, and then a specific impact. So if you, for example, assume that you want to choose jobs, then you have to be more specific about that. For example, an increase in jobs in the and your policy or action is solar PV, for example, manufacturing industry. So an increase in job is the specific impact that you want to focus on. And then the indicator is number of people employed, for example. And then the parameter is the value, is something that's tangible. Is basically, for example, is the electricity price in the case of the policy or action that you have, or the wage that the worker gets, or the income that they get. So these are the things that you need to know when you do the assessment. These are basically all the steps. Also, under the ICAT framework, we provided a comprehensive list about each dimension, what are the related impact categories available, and then we also link them with the sustainable development goals. So each impact category represents which sustainable development goals, and it helps when you talk about the tracking of sustainable development goals. So by using the ICAT framework, you can also, when you do your assessment, you can also give report on how much you contribute to sustainable development goals. Having said that, I need to mention or remind you that when you do the assessment, you need to do the stakeholder consultation, and maybe during the stakeholder consultation, you come up with another group of impact category and an indicator later on for that, and that's completely fine. So because this is just a menu of options, so it's not that you have to stick to this. So there are other impact categories that you can come up with. So that was the environment, social, and economic impact. That just continued off that table. We have another question. Let me, before answering that question, we have two questions for Maria Paz. I would like her to read that questions and answer the questions. Maybe I can read it and then she can start answering them. So the first question is in the NDC update process that the countries are undertaking, how actively is being the private sector involvement? And the second question is, and compare with the first or initial NDC, which is the main difference of the participation of private sector to establish the new NDC objective. So I'm guessing the person is asking about the NDC. So please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Fatemeh. Do you hear me fine? Yeah. Okay. The first thing is on the first question. Actually, what we found out with the research that we did that is ongoing is that most of the private sector are not involved with the NDC process as such. They have been in events, but they don't really understand the link of what they're doing with this NDC process. So I think that the private sector is beginning, and with COVID to understand the relevance of doing climate action, not because the Paris Agreement says so, but because there's a risk for them in terms of sustaining their businesses in time, and the second because there are opportunities, niche of markets that they can take advantage of. So I think both the private sector and they are having meetings, for example, within business associations with the Ministry of Environment to understand how they're contributed to SDGs and especially to climate action. And there, I think with this conversation, we're going to be more able to understand the different things that private sector is doing and how can governments actually align what they are trying to do with that they are doing, the private sector is doing on the ground. How do we align that? It's difficult because the methodologies have different levels, right? And so the national levels are very ample and normally very wide methodologies. Well, when you are talking about a company, you are using specific data. So there's a challenge in compatibilities, but at the moment, I think it's important to register the actions of the private sector and the actions of the government with separate methodologies. The other thing that is happening that is very interesting is these tools that some governments are putting, given accessibility to private sector companies that are called huellas. Footprints, Peru footprint, Chile footprint, I don't know, I think Costa Rica is doing that too, where the private sector can actually put their inventories, their footprints, their carbon footprints, and also report them every year, and also report if they are verifying that. So you can keep track of that, and that really motivates them, because it's an incentive, they can be visibilized. On the second question, what is the main difference? I think what happened is since the governments are now understanding that there are activities that they can count on from the private sector, they are incrementing the ambitions of the NDC. But I don't see necessarily a link to establish, well, with private sector, I'm going to increase my ambition 60%, because there's no assessment on that yet that I know. So I hope that I have answered your questions, and thank you for them.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask Young, if you received any question, please read and answer one question.
No, actually, I did not receive any questions.
Okay, great. Yeah. So I will answer the last question that I received, and then we can end the webinar. So the question is how to decide which impact categories to choose to assess sustainable development and report on it. So we have different criteria that you can use. The three most important criteria is that so you need to know about the significance of the impact category. I talked about it during my presentation. You need to know about the relevance of the impact category. For example, is it relevant to the objective of the assessment or the national or local policy or action that you're doing, and the goals, sustainable development goals, and the stakeholder priority. Then also you need to make sure about the comprehensiveness of that impact category, which refers to two things, both positive and negative impacts should be touched upon by the assessment, and then also to make sure that you're doing an integrated assessment so that impact category can be from the three dimensions of the environment and social and economic. And of course, the most important thing that you need to make sure and validate all the impact categories that you choose with by using the stakeholder consultation and get their feedback on that, because it's been many cases that so you come up with some impact category on the paper, and then when you discuss it with the stakeholders, that impact category is actually not that important, and there are other important impact category that you can use for your assessment. So thank you very much for your participation. We will, if you have more questions, you're welcome to send your questions to us. Then we can include your questions when we are translating the slides to Spanish and upload, so then you can see the answers. Thank you for all the questions that you asked. We hope to see you for other webinar that we will have under this class.